This is a Culture Inject production.
Hello, my name is Chirag, and welcome to the Neverspodcast. Today we'll talk about episode 3 of the Nevers titled Ignition, so stick around.
If you'd like to follow us online, visit our website at hbothenevers.com, on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram and YouTube at hbothenevers and at the Nevers Podcast without an A. You can stream the Nevers Podcast on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, SoundCloud, Stitcher, Amazon Podcasts, YouTube and anywhere else that you can stream podcasts.
If you have any ideas, interviews, requests, comments or questions, email us at theneverspodcast@gmail.com. Please also rate and review our podcast as it helps our podcast reach more listeners. Speaking of reviews, we have one here from Nico Angelis on YouTube. He wrote, in response to our review of episode 1, "That was a really good review. Loved all three of you and your insight." Thank you, Nico.
And another one from Dice Catastrophe on Twitter, who tweeted, I enjoyed talking with friends and family about Lovecraft Country Radio as much as I loved talking with them about the actual show. If I can get people to watch the Nevers, I probably won't bother with the Touch Base, the official podcast. The Nevers podcast seems much better so far. So if you're watching the Nevers, listen to at HBO the Nevers, which is us. It's way better than the official podcast and is closer to the official podcast for Lovecraft Country, but without the cast cameos. So that's kind of opposite to a review that we got last week from Tomorrow.
We received an email last week asking us not to spoil subsequent episodes that we'd be reviewing at the end of our show. Monty wrote in saying, "At the end of your otherwise great episode 2 review, you spoiled the plot of episode 3 without warning. Please don't do this. Some of us actively avoid spoilers. Coming in as fresh as possible makes the experience more enjoyable as plot points are revealed when and as the author intended. Timing is key to storytelling, and spoilers, well, spoil that key ingredient. I don't even watch the after-episode interviews because seeing the actors out of character talking about their characters breaks the illusion just a bit. I realize and respect not everyone shares my opinion or enthusiasm on the issue, but even just a quick spoiler warning would give folks like me a second to hit pause or fast forward to opt out. Thanks again for the work and thought you put into the podcast. It shows." Thanks, Monty. Going forward, we won't provide a synopsis for the next episode. We respect your thoughts and opinions and your enthusiasm, and we'll make sure not to do that.
But here's the synopsis for this episode review. So episode 3, called Ignition, airing April 25th, 2021. So Penance creates an amplifier to spread Mary's song across the city, but first, Mary must find her elusive voice. As danger mounts against her group, Amalia propositions an unlikely ally and sets out to expand the orphanage's reach.
Within this episode, we have all of the usual cast and crew returning, and I would like to introduce Martin Ford as Nicholas Odium Purble, who we saw briefly in episode 1, and Brett Curtis as George Thomas. This episode was written by Kevin Lau and directed by David Samee.
So, initial impressions for this episode, I really enjoyed it again. I felt like it was very, very heavy action compared to the other two. It was a lot more action. It still had the same kind of choppy feeling as the second episode. So, it's lots and lots of little bits jumping back and forth. But I liked that because it was like, here's a little bit of backstory for this character, and then here's an action sequence, and then, giving us a bit of variation throughout. So my favourite thing from this episode was the fight scene between Amalia and Odium. I thought it was fantastic. I don't think there was anything I didn't really like about it.
I think for me, the same, really. I liked the fight between Odium and Amalia, and it wasn't, I wouldn't say an unmemorable episode for me, but it had a lot of things that happened in loads of different kind of segments, and where there was no real flow to it, there are bits of it that I feel like I can't really remember all that well. But yeah, the standout point was that Amalia and Odium fight. That was brilliant.
I enjoyed this episode too. The most significant thing for me was the Mary scene in the very end. And then I noticed there were a lot of like very strong rejections to infidelity in this episode. Like we have Hugo Swan reminding Detective Frank Mundy of their kind of relationship, and he gets pissed off and says, "I was drunk." And then we have some lady hinting to Lord Masson of some rumors of his taking a mistress. I think she says Amalia. And then he gets pissed off and fires someone. And then we have Amalia, who kind of goaded Dr. Horatio into acknowledging their almost infidelity, and he also got pissed off. So a lot of folks getting pissed off about infidelity. I liked the digging into Amalia as an unconventional hero, as a leader who is perhaps not qualified to be the leader, not a good role model. Like she's out there huffing opium instead of being her narcotized friend's designated driver, straight up exposing that almost infidelity in front of the young innocent folks in the orphanage and all sorts of reckless behavior. And I mean, maybe that's kind of the heart of this episode, where Mary kind of directly questions Amalia and her qualifications and whether this is even something worth subscribing to. We can probably talk about that later. I thought this was really Bonfire Annie's episode, in terms of structurally how it played out, because Bonfire Annie, hers is the first recognizable face that we see coming out from the shadows, and then hers is also the last face we see after the heartbreaking thing that happens, and her showing up at the end is almost like a salve after the third-degree burns of losing Mary, which is ironic considering Annie's the one who brings the fire. But I liked that arc, and we can talk about that later a little bit more. There's also a very strong theme of the touched, is being touched a curse, or is it a gift? And that question was very much left in limbo at the end, and I mean, we'll talk about that again. I feel like I'm just predicting us talking more about each of these things, but hopefully we'll get to it. And just one more thing I wanted to mention was the Hugo Swan Lavinia parallel that I noticed. So they're both using the touched, and interestingly, most of the people in the public would look at Hugo Swan as the one who's doing the immoral, illegal things and abusing them, and they would look at Lavinia as kind of the benevolent champion of the touched. And I noticed in this episode, it kind of makes the opposite case, that Hugo is actually providing the touched with paying jobs, with housing, with safety, even though on the surface it looks like he's exploiting them. And maybe he is, to an extent. But on the opposite side of the spectrum, where you'd think Lavinia is the champion, she was, in the last episode, exposed as the secret Nazi. So I thought that was interesting, a nice little parallel. And I thought that whole scene in the Ferriman's Club with the auditioning part was a bit skeevy for me. If I had to choose one thing I didn't like in this episode, it felt a little too Harvey Weinstein-y. But other than that, I enjoyed this episode. And with that, we can dovetail into the beat-by-beat analysis. So the episode begins with Bonfire Annie shutting down the Beggar King's operations at the dock. So Amalia and Penance confront her, and they try to recruit her.
Yeah, I thought that was a great scene. It's like this great mix of like action and comedy and story. So you've obviously got Bonfire Annie and Amalia, and they're seemingly going to have a fight. But then you've got Penance jumping in with her little gadget. And I don't know, I feel like it's finding humour in the places where you might not expect it. And it's always the funniest of little interactions. Obviously, she just kind of ends up disappearing. But before that, yeah, she says that she left Melody's gang because she was sick of riddles after Amalia starts talking almost in riddles to her again.
And she's very much, like in the beginning, a mercenary still, or at least she was a mercenary working for Melody. But we see her in this episode fighting for herself, I guess, which is some transformation from the last episode. And then at the very end, we see Bonfire Annie trading in her mercenary gang stuff for something higher than that, a mission maybe. A better world. She's finally believing in something. A bit reminiscent of maybe Malcolm Reynolds in Serenity. He finally finds something to believe in and something to fight for, and can't stop the signal. After that scene, we cut to an exchange between Dr. Horatio and Amalia, where we learn that Amalia and Horatio's feelings were deepening until Horatio walked away. But the question is, how far away did he walk? Did he really leave it at the map? Or is there more there?
Yeah, that's the thing. And that's what she says, you didn't get very far. Because, yeah, it must be hard. Obviously, something's happened between them. However far they got with that, we don't know. But he's decided to stop because obviously he has his wife and his kid to think about. But he's still there. He's still in the danger zone of... still having all these feelings and being there with the person. Is that, a healthy place to be? Still not very good to his wife and kids, is it really? To be sticking around someone that he's obviously got feelings for.
Melody in the carriage car. Melody mentions that when the time comes, who are you going to blame? Which is almost a prophecy of the fact that he is going to have to, or I don't know, maybe I'm just calling an apple an orange, but it feels like that there's going to be some conflict between him and Amalia. Obviously there already is, but something similar to Melody and Amalia's conflict, it was prophesied for him, which I thought was interesting. Mary questions Amalia about what her greater mission is. That was another key scene. You guys have any thoughts about that one?
It's interesting, isn't it? She walks into the kitchen and they all suddenly stop having fun. And it makes you wonder, because my initial impression is that she gets on very well with all of the people at the orphanage and isn't treated as like a boss or a headmistress type thing. That it's like a family. But when that happens, it's like, are they all like a little bit scared of her or worried that, or just think, she's not fun, she can't have fun. Because she's always serious and running around and having to get in fights and stuff. Yeah, I find it really interesting. And obviously, I know later on she says, maybe the reason that she can't sing to bring all the people here because she doesn't know whether they should. And that's really heavy because it's, obviously, yeah, would you want to, if you can't trust the people that are there, do you want to lure lots of other people there helplessly into the hands of you don't know what? And even once she decides that she can trust the people at the orphanage, unfortunately she's still kind of unknowingly putting them in the hands of Lavinia Bidlow, Do you know what I mean? So even when you think you can trust the people that run the orphanage, but the person that actually runs it is not trustworthy. So it's a hard position for all of them to be in because they're all just trying to do the best they can and obviously keep as safe as they can. But it's a very uncertain world.
It does make you wonder if maybe when, Amalia says to Mary that she woke up 3 years ago knowing something that she shouldn't, it makes you wonder if because of that fact, maybe she's not that open to the other people. And I think there is kind of like an air of mystery around that, especially when Mary questions everyone else and they're all there for what they think are completely different reasons.
Right, yeah.
Yeah, and when Lord Masson in the previous episode was discussing Amalia, he's like, she's not just a baker. And yeah, I don't think master martial arts is in the job requirements for being a baker. So there's definitely something about her that she's not revealing.
Yes, moving on. We have this scene at Ferryman's Club. We see that Hugo is still committed to using the Bidlow name. and he talks to Augustus about this. And then a bit further on after their little discussion, we see him then saying to one of the young ladies to file those papers. So there's still that manipulation there with Hugo and Augustus.
Yeah, I mean, it's still just this thing of Augustus is clearly uncomfortable and not happy, really, with what's going on. But, this is his friend, possibly the only friend that he has. And I guess he doesn't want to upset him And also, this is, I think, even though if he's worried about the Bidlow name being on such a place, if it's his first kind of, venture on his own, away from his sister, it's, a way for him to have something of his own, even if it's not something that he's fully on board with. It's just, if he is being really controlled and manipulated by his sister all the time, this is, the first thing that he can have some control over. So and Augustus knows this, Hugo knows this, right, because he says, he's boss. He says, you're the boss, This will be your thing. And that is quite enticing.
And it's interesting that you mentioned, Laura, that Augustus his only friend is Hugo and he doesn't want to lose that. Because later in this episode we see Detective Frank Mundy asking Hugo, where are all your friends? So it might also, the same might be true for the both of them. That they don't realize they're each other's only friends.
Right, yeah.
I think another thing that I really liked was the fact that Hugo turns around to Augustus and is just just say no to everything. And it's something that he doesn't, and seems to be clearly uncomfortable with, is just saying no. And then he gives that kind of, a half-hearted no to the woman that keeps on kind of offering herself because his boss. I really liked that. That was a good comical moment. So moving on, the episode then reveals that Lord Masson was married and had a daughter. So I think it's safe to assume that we can say that was the daughter in the previous episode that passed away. I think both of his wife and... Yeah, so it says... we see the tombstones, don't we, quite clearly. And his wife died in 1887 and his daughter died in 1896. And the event that turned everyone was in 1896. So I think, it is safe to say it definitely is the daughter.
And it's interesting that his yearning for the past, his clinging to the past, and his fighting against change is rooted in personal tragedy.
It sort of reminds me of Scrooge in a weird way, where his past kind of affects his future, and his quite a not an angry person, but he's definitely been affected by this in some way, and he sees this event so negatively. And then we move on to Lord Masson attending a meeting where they discuss their investments. I don't know if you have any kind of views or ideas on what these investments might be.
I think he's investing in Tesla. I heard that's going on. I don't even remember the scene actually. What was this? What was the scene about? Do you guys remember?
So I remember it's a few of them around the table and they've got those hourglass things on the table again. I feel like one of the only things I remember from this scene is them saying investments, and it twigs your interest as to what have these guys got going on. I don't think they talk about what exactly it is in any great detail, so it's kind of left to us to think about.
And I think they formed an all-male committee on the touched, and none of them being touched themselves, which is a good reflection of just the world we live in today.
Yeah.
And how politics works, and how all of the committees that decide policy on people's lives and people's bodies and all sorts of stuff doesn't actually represent the people it actually affects.
Yeah, so I think we're going to have to see some more from them to figure out what's actually going on behind the scenes. Then we see the Beggar King with his henchmen, and, after what happened at the beginning with Bonfire, and he's setting fire to all their stuff. He's obviously not a happy man, and he slices a chunk of flesh off of one of them. We also get a closer look at Odium, played by Martin Ford, who, like Shaun said, we saw him very briefly at the bit where they get in the carriage in the first episode. But yeah, he is a big dude. But yeah, the Beggar King's pretty scary. He's just here to reinstate how scary he is as like a gang leader type thing. I like how he lets the pup, the new guy, he lets him off because, you know, he doesn't know any better. But the other guy, yeah, he gets it.
Yeah, he's obviously brutal and almost sadistic. I don't know if he's taking pleasure in it or not. It definitely makes him more intimidating when you consider Odium somewhat respects him, and that makes you almost fear the Beggar King more. Or at least for me it does.
Also, I like the line they say about, Odium will take you for a walk on the Thames. And that's for me, I'm like, oh, he must be able to walk on water. That's what I'm like, oh, that must be his turn, which later obviously we see. So then after that we see the meeting with Detective Mundy and Hugo. So yeah, this is in the pub, right? So he leaves him waiting for like 2 hours with the note, and it seems like he doesn't think he's there, and he follows, you know, just this young guy to the back of the pub. And then, oh, surprise, it's Hugo, which he then claims, you know, no, I knew you was here. And we learn more about their relationship. But, yeah, I think you mentioned at the start, Chirag, that, you know, he's claiming that he was drunk when they got together, and then as he leaves the room, Hugo's like, you know, you were drunk the first time.
And just in that, just talking about that in general, when the detective Frank Mundy first walks into the bar to meet with Hugo Swan, the bar lady asks, "What's your preference?" And he's kind of stunned for a second. I liked that scene, the kind of double entendre there. And then later on, at the very end, or in his conversation with Mary, when Mundy says, "I want to be there just in case. I want to hear you sing." And then in that scene when she's singing, that kind of brought his arc to a very beautiful close for me, because in that scene, Mundy is trying to be something that he's not. And that it ties into his homosexuality, because he wants to be with Mary like he wants to hear her song, and neither can be, because he's just not touched and he's not straight. So that's a nice little parallel there. And every time it cuts to him and he's just disconnected from it, he wants so badly to hear that song, but he doesn't. And he can't be something he's not. He has to ultimately accept the fact that he's gay and he's not touched.
I think it's nice to see how much they clearly care about each other, though. Like through they've gone through this, you know, he clearly really cares about her, and she the same, because she says, you know, she just wants him to be. She can't ask him to be someone he's not. You know, she wants him to be who he is and be happy. So both Swan and Mundy think that there's something going on with Amalia and that she's not to be trusted, which is funny because, as far as we're aware, she's totally fine, and it's, you know, Bidlow that is the big bad. But even people close to Amalia, I guess, you know, think she's hiding stuff, which I'm gonna, you know, we'll get on at the end of it once we get to the end of the episode, because I've got a lot to say after the. And then we've got the flyers. Obviously, we learnt in the last episode with the young girl from the shop who gets taken after finding this flyer with Amalia's face on and going and getting taken by the doctor. And now they're walking through the street, which obviously leads us into their investigation which is, I guess, what you would do first, right? Go to the address and see what's happening. So we get to see the first kind of bit of action with Amalia and Lucy. Because it's implied in the first episode that Lucy is like the muscle. And in the second episode, when they go to the house, she's like, take Lucy to kind of look after them all. She's almost like the bodyguard, mother hen of the orphanage, I feel like. So you get to see her kind of leave and go out into action for the first time. And yeah, we get that whole little fight scene. Anything to say about that? Did you guys enjoy that fight scene in the...
Yeah, I really like that, and I really like the reveal of kind of like the almost cybernetic type bodyguard. That was quite interesting And I feel like that's now going to kind of open up a new kind of little side line for us to see how they're, created. But I liked the fact that we saw Lucy, she broke open the door with her hands. And then that little kind of fight between them both, the cyborg and them both. And I really liked that whole umbrella electrocution-y bit. That was great.
Do you guys know the chariot driver for Amalia is also like an android, right?
Yeah.
Do you think that maybe Lavinia is using Penance's tech for her own ends, I guess? She's just taken that and making it more creepy?
Could be. I mean, in the first episode, after when they tried to take Myrtle, the carriage is seemingly left behind, right? I don't know if they made another one or if they retrieved it, but they pop out the carriage in the little car and they leave the actual carriage with the driver on top. So, and even, they've got access to the workshop, I guess. So it's highly likely that, they're taking her technology for Dr. Haig to kind of tinker with.
And then she goes right back to Lavinia with all the information.
Oh, this was my thing. She packs up all the boxes and Lucy's like, what are you doing? Lavinia needs to see this. And you're like, oh no. And as she leaves Lavinia, I'm skipping a little bit ahead here, but as she leaves the office, she says, we're meeting at the park at dusk, and walks out. And you're like, no. Not only have you just shown her that you have discovered all this, but you're telling her where you're going. Again, it's all about trust, isn't it? Everyone thinks they can trust the wrong people, and I feel like people, are trusting the wrong people and not trusting the people that will actually probably help them. It's but again, it's really difficult when you're in a world where nobody seems to like you. So I guess you take any of the help you can get, right?
Yeah, and I just wanted to mention real quick the quote that we talked about in the last episode, that no one whispers about virtue. Yeah. From Hugo Swan. I just realized in this moment that it perfectly describes Lavinia, because she's the loudest person about her virtue, and those people often are compensating for something. So
yeah, she goes on so hard about being charitable and doing all this good work, and it's just to cover up the fact that she's possibly incredibly evil.
Yeah, so Penance, Desiree and Lucy and a few of the other people at the orphanage interrogate the woman who Amalia and Lucy visited, and we discover that, she had a daughter who was one of the touched. Her daughter could turn liquids into water, and subsequently she murdered her daughter because she sees the turned as abominations. And obviously Lucy had a child who she accidentally killed, which when her ability kind of came on at the time. And, I mean, she completely flipped, didn't she? That was just such a very strong emotional moment, and you could see that in her eyes. For me, you can see why she did it, and why she was about to, completely obliterate almost the woman.
Yeah, I mean, I think, with Lucy herself, obviously, you can see her slowly taking off her gloves, she's gonna, but also just the reactions of all of the actors in the room, all of the characters, is fantastic, because obviously they're talking about them, basically, and they're thinking, especially with Myrtle, I think to myself, she was in a situation where her parent, the people looking after her, totally could have done something like that. They were scared of her, and you see that in her face. She's like, damn, this is something that easily could have happened to me. This is how much people hate us and are scared of us. I guess thinking that they're super lucky that they're there and they're part of this family, which in turn, gives a reason for Mary to really believe in why they're there. They've all gone through hardships like this, hearing about what Lucy went through, and now they're all seemingly kind of happy and have a home and a family. That really gives you a reason to think, this is a worthwhile cause and this is the place to be. I need to help these people.
Exactly. You said it better than I could have. But I'm just going to... This is my favorite scene, and I'm going to echo some of what you guys were talking about. But what I loved about this scene, and I'm going to go super religious again. Sorry, people listening. but the lady who they kidnapped, so her daughter turned wine into water, right? And that's the opposite of Jesus. So that's literally the Antichrist. And that makes sense from the lady's perspective, that this is the Antichrist, an abomination, as you said. And so she killed her daughter on purpose for being touched. Whereas Lucy killed her child on accident because she was touched. So in both of these situations, being touched was more like a curse than it was a gift. And I think because of that, so that scene convinces Mary of what she needs to do. Mary needs to show the world that being touched is not a curse, it's a gift. Because what Mary has is the gift, it's the better world. So I loved that persuasion of Mary, where she takes agency. No, we are going to the park. And I also wanted to mention the lady's daughter who turned the wine into water is an interesting contrast with Odium, because while the girl was considered by her mother to be the opposite of Jesus, the girl still used her powers for good, whereas Odium literally has Jesus' powers, and he uses them to drown people. So the contrast between the two, the duality of the touched, the good and the bad, they're really playing with that in interesting ways. And the theme of, is being touched more like a curse or is it a gift, kind of comes to a head with the arc of Bonfire Annie. Because in the beginning we see Bonfire Annie using her fire for destruction. She's blowing things up, she's challenging the Beggar King, all of this stuff, right? So in the beginning, Bonfire Annie uses her fire for destruction. In the end, she uses her fire as a beacon of light to guide the oppressed, the downtrodden, the touched to the promised land. That was her arc and her transformation in this episode. And that perfectly encapsulated that theme. So I really loved that. I'll say that. And just talking, did you guys have any other thoughts?
Only a side note on, I think, Penance's character. The fact that she I think cares enough about all of the women there, and she could see, I think, the build up of like Lucy's aura almost, and it was getting angry, and she was quick enough to be there for her and stop her from doing anything too rash. I really liked that kind of little touch.
And that in itself is showing like the difference between them and other people. So, you know, they're literally listening to someone talk about killing someone that could have been any of them. And a lot of people could have just lost it and just killed her, or, do you know what I mean, tortured her, whatever. And they're not. They're really very coming across, you know, they're all very kind, very family-orientated people. It's good to see, like, a real clear distinction between the bad guys and the good guys in this instance. Because in a lot of the other show, in, like, the rest of the show, it's sometimes the line's a bit blurred.
So we have after that, the scene where Malady meets Horatio to get the bullet removed from her chest. She reveals that they all knew each other in the past. There's a bit of interesting dialogue. Malady says, "Is this what Molly's atonement looks like?" And Horatio responds, "I think you blame her for something she couldn't control." And Malady responds to that, "I wonder who you will blame when the time comes." When the time comes, will Malia betray him like she betrayed Malady? What are your guys' thoughts?
I think it's interesting to learn that not just the two of them know each other, but seemingly Horatio as well. So then it's, you know, she says that she thinks she remembers a doctor. He's like, yeah, no, that was me. So is this a time... Because obviously we know that Malady was in some kind of asylum. And from what she says in this episode... Amalia says that she woke up 3 years ago knowing things she didn't know and basically ended up, presumably in this asylum, with Malady. And then we can also assume that Horatio was a doctor there. So, again, assuming, this is where they all know each other from just 3 years ago, possibly, if not before. Yeah, I guess it's fun. It's interesting to see that Horatio... Well, obviously a little bit scared because he says, you know, are you going to do to me like what you did to all your other doctors? We think, you know, kill him. But he's also comfortable around her, you know, because he does know her. Yeah, it's interesting to see this character who we've only kind of seen be a bit crazy and out there and very full on and downright, you know, killing people and stuff. See this kind of innocence. She's there because she needs help. She's in danger of dying herself because she's been shot. And she's literally asking for help, and even though it's forced, he seems to help her because he actually cares, not just because he might die if he doesn't. So it's nice to see. I think they had a very nice dynamic between the two of them in the carriage. I think it was... I liked it. On
an argument kind of side, though, is he just helping her because he took the Hippocratic Oath? It's his doctor's kind of, you know, it's something he's not almost obliged to do, but, you know, it's something he took an oath for to help people in need. So in the flip side, do you think maybe that is just possibly why he's doing it?
Yeah,
I guess so.
I think you're right, because he says in the first episode he gave up being choosy with who he heals and who his clients are. He doesn't want to be called a voodoo witch doctor, so he'll take employment where he gets it. He doesn't heal for a higher purpose other than to do his job. At least that's the sense that I'm getting from him. And that was a weirdly intimate scene, wasn't it? Nakedness aside, there was a lot of heavy eye contact. And
it's just like, even when he like glares at her foot and without any words, she's just like, okay, I'll move my foot. You know, it's just that it seems like they had an intimacy just in their relationship.
And Malady kind of crosses a point of no return. We'll get to that in a second. But before we do, let's talk about one more time the scene where Amalia's on her way to the park and her carriage gets tipped over into the river and she's attacked by Odium, who, it's revealed, can walk on water.
So yeah, this was my absolute favourite.
Jesus.
I think you watch a lot of things where fight scenes can become repetitive and not very interesting, and, you know, they're just put in there for no reason. This was fantastic. So, as I say earlier, when he said about Odium taking someone for a walk on the Thames, Manson thought, okay, he can walk on water. So then when you see the carriage get smashed and she flies straight out into the river, it's like, oh, it's Odium, right? Because not only is he a big enough dude to knock the carriage over, but you know he's going to just come down. And he does. And it's so menacing. He's walking across the water and she's panicking, going to try and swim away. My first thought was, can he not go through water? Because I guess the best thing with an ability like that would be able to switch it on and off, right? So you can walk on water if you need to, but go through it if you need to. But I'm thinking maybe he can't go through water. And when he starts with the chains and everything, I'm thinking, oh wow, he's putting himself in a really bad position for someone like Amalia, who's, you know, quick-witted and good at fighting, because she can totally turn this around. And I'm thinking, I really hope she turns this around and drags him down against the water and strangles him. And then it happened, and I was so happy because it was just done so well. Because it is, you know, he's seemingly in this like real big position of power, but she turned the tables on him so quickly and takes out this, you know, 7-foot dude.
It was definitely a game of whack-a-mole for a second. He kept punching her every time she came up for a breath. And It's really jarring for me to see like a power that's so stereotypically divine being used in this goon kind of way. The fact that she wins it's kind of treated almost casually at the end. She just kind of casually shrugs it off and continues on her journey like a normal thing happened.
It's just a normal occurrence for her, yeah.
Get attacked by the biggest man in the world. Just a normal thing.
No biggie, you know.
And then we get to the apocryphal scene. While singing her song in the park, Mary is killed by Malady's henchmen. You guys can start off with your thoughts, and then I'll chime in at the end.
I think for me, knowing that Lavinia knows and all that lot, I had that kind of fear already that something like that was going to happen. And you're almost kind of like screaming internally, because you're like, it's going to happen, but you just don't want it to. The look on Myrtle, yes. The look on Myrtle's face whilst the singing is going on, I don't know, it's just so interesting to see that, because everyone else looks so at peace, and she there's just something there. I don't know, we don't know what that is, but this is something, and it would be now interesting to see, what that is. I mean, was she expecting the same thing, or what? But I don't know, she looks horrified.
For me, I was like, okay, so she's clearly actually hearing whatever she's singing, right? Because for us, it's just, we don't know what she's singing. It's random, weird, made-up words or whatever, or just noises. But knowing that Myrtle's turn is she can speak every language, it seems, understand every language. I'm just like sitting there shocked because, oh my god, she can actually hear whatever she's singing, I guess. That's my first instinct. She can understand that she's actually singing something, and now it's going to be, for me, the anticipation of the next episode, if they're going to try and, if she's going to try and tell the others whatever she thinks Mary was actually saying. Yeah, so I was super, super excited. And then that excitement gets, instantly brought down, right, when the gunman, let's rip at Mary. And that was a shock horror moment.
I gotta give it up to you, Laura. I didn't think of that. That's a brilliant point. Good insight.
I was so like, oh no, I think, because we watched it together, Shaun and I, so I think I was probably slapping him like, oh my god, she knows they're saying something, and Myrtle knows what it is. She can understand.
So my feeling about that scene, and forgive me in advance or just entertain me, this might be another case of calling an orange a plum, but the Mary Brighton death scene kind of gave me echoes of the MLK assassination, Martin Luther King Jr. Because when I was watching that, I was thinking to myself, who in human history was a greater orator who used his voice to greater effect than Martin Luther King did? And MLK was assassinated because of his beautiful voice, his voice that he used to give hope to an oppressed people. So her assassination, her silencing, felt a lot like echoes of history. And then with the culminating scene of Bonfire Annie bringing a new batch of the touch to the orphanage, we see that the hope that she gave people, it lives on beyond her. And she gave something invaluable to the world, even though she had to leave before her time. And that scene really affected me. I love that scene.
Slightly smaller details that I enjoyed in that scene as well was after the shooting, even though Amalia has just gone through hell and is, soaking wet, cold, I would presume, wrapped in a blanket, kind of being consoled by Penance, as soon as the first shot is fired, she immediately pushes Penance out the way and is there to protect her. And it's just, I just love their relationship. They're so cute. I just love their friendship so much. And then, just as instant as that, Mundy is straight with a handgun, literally running into machine gun fire, to get the guy who's just killed Mary, which we can only imagine is ridiculously traumatic for all of them, but obviously especially for Mundy because he has a personal relationship with Mary. Yeah, and he's gone from this moment of seeing her in her element, because he said that he hadn't seen her sing on stage for so long, seeing her in her element, to having her shot down right in front of him. it's emotional. And then you see how much they've all been affected by it when they walk back into the orphanage, to only see, another glimmer of hope with Bonferroni and all the new people that have come to the orphanage for refuge.
Any favorite quotes? Lines of dialogue?
Yeah, I don't think it had as many standout kind of one-liners for me as the other episodes. I did enjoy Amalia's part when she's speaking with Mary at the beginning and she's kind of talking about herself and why she's, I guess, not particularly necessarily a great leader. You know, she's giving you a little mini bio of herself. And I enjoyed that, but I can't think of any quotes off the top of my head that I really enjoyed.
Yeah, I think her line was, I drink when I shouldn't, I fight when I needn't, and I fuck men whose names I don't remember.
Yeah. Yeah, I thought that was good. That's probably the best one for me. But yeah, and then just sticking with you again, like the bit where she tells Lavinia Bidlow, you know, we're going to be in the park at dusk, and having looked back over it, obviously now the gunman's there, so you're assuming that it's Lavinia Bidlow that has sent the gunman there.
All right, you guys want to move on to reading some letters from listeners?
Yeah, let's have a look at the letters. If you have a question, comment, or theory that you'd like to share with us, tweet it to us at theneverspodcast without an A, or send us an email at theneverspodcast@gmail.com, and we'll read it on an upcoming episode.
So our first letter is from Jackie, who writes, I watch with the captions on and caught a clue. When Amalia is under the spell of Desiree, when she is rambling, she starts to say that Mary is the voice of Galen. Then she stops when she realises what is happening. Might we have gotten a clue as to the name of the race that gave the powers? What is the voice of Galen? Amalia knows more than we see for now, but she would love to hear our thoughts on that.
Right, well, it's obviously an alien overlord. I think that settles it.
Sounds like it, doesn't it?
It makes you kind of think of Gallifrey, Galen.
Yeah, Galen, Garland, I'm not sure how we're meant to say that. And, I mean, you can't always, just put it out there, you can't always trust the captions. I really focused on this line and this bit in that episode, and I didn't pick up on it. And then with my crazy theory that I spoke about after this episode about, you know, have they been sent here before? Do they know about it, Melody and Amalia? Have they been sent here years ago from some alien race? And because this totally points to that. But yeah, it's definitely interesting, and like I say, it plays into my theory, so I'm all for it. Yeah, what is this? Is it the race of aliens or whatever?
Well, thank you, Jackie.
Thank you, Jackie. So our second letter is from Bruce Majors, and we already know how my Lavinia as a Nazi theory has gone gangbusters. Please delete your podcast. I love the show, but your podcast is seriously deficient. Nazis tried to exterminate ethnic groups they believed were genetically different from them, not people who were just raised with a different language, accent, or culture. They actually tried to culturally reintegrate ethnic Germans in other countries. Irish people are not genetically different from English or Welsh people, they just have a different culture. The whole Nazi riff your male podcaster had was just dumb, Bruce. Well, I appreciate you sending in your letter, Bruce, and I agree with you. I think maybe we're not on the same page. I never blame the listener. I might have not communicated my ideas as effectively as I could have. When I was referring to the incident of anti-Irish sentiment going on in this episode, which was prevalent in Europe, in UK particularly for a long time, even today a little bit, I wasn't tying that was just a kind of a general racism that was not Nazi specific. I was just using that incident of general racism as a point to kind of prove the Nazi theory, but just talking about where I was coming from and the perspective I had watching the last episode, I don't think it's that far-fetched to make the connection between the touched and the chosen people. I think that's a very clear corollary there. the Touched were the Touched were literally chosen by God or by an alien or whatever it may be, just as in Hebrew mythology or religion, however you want to call it, the Jewish people were chosen by God. And there's a history of anti-Semitism, oppression against the Jewish people, and we're seeing it now against the Touched as well. The Touched are attacked, they're being attacked in the streets, kidnapped, experimented on, put to work in underground, we don't know exactly what it is yet, like I guess work camps, which to me was very reminiscent of an Auschwitz kind of thing. So, but then again, this is just my view, and everybody's view is as valid as another person's. You know, it's kind of like looking at clouds. Some people see a gun, some people see a horse. It's all up to everybody's perspective is just as valid as everybody else's, and so is yours, Bruce. So I appreciate your opinion, and I thank you for listening, and hopefully listening again.
So our last letter is from long-time listener and supporter of the Nevers podcast, Berger? Sorry if I'm saying this wrong. Hi, long-time listener. So first I want to say hi to the new hosts. You're great. I teach religion, so Chirag is really speaking my language with his theology musings. I wanted to write in and point out some stuff in the first 2 episodes of the Nevers that made me think of other shows in the Whedonverse. So Augie hating on Larks feels like a nod to William the bloody awful poet. William likes the romantic qualities of the lark while Augie prefers the crow, because as an ornithologist he sees past the superficial beauty of the lark and prefers the good-natured crow. Primrose is reminiscent of Dawn's storyline in Season 8, though the less said of Season 8 and that storyline is in particular is the better. Melody has a lot in common with Drusilla. Superficially, they like to cut throats, their eyes turn yellow, and they talk crazy. Looking a little closer, they were both sexually abused. Melody is said to connect her abusers to God, and Drusilla is sexually abused in a church by Angelus and Darla. So I didn't react to anything Lavinia says in a way that Chirag did, because I expected Lavinia to be much like Adele DeWitt. Adele was unbelievably cruel and ruthless, but most of the awful things she did was to protect the relative independence of the LA branch of the Dollhouse from the top suits at Rossum, and I thought that Lavinia was merely trying to protect her orphanage in the same way. This is the Victorian age. Misogyny and racism are the norm. Keeping up appearances can be a matter of survival. Lavinia's words to Augie therefore make perfect rational sense, because if the male head of their family got involved with an Irish Catholic commoner, it could lose them the standing that they need to keep the authorities at bay. So that's it. I just wanted to write in and share some thoughts, so do with it as thou wilt, Berger. So, and P.S. Matthew, you're a treasure for keeping the podcast going. Can you just remind me what the... I haven't seen Buffy for a while now. What's the Dawn storyline in Season 8? Or I know it says the less said of that is...
the Season 8 comics were Dawn... I haven't read it, but
yeah,
I think...
Oh, it's the... Oh, okay.
Yeah.
More knowledge than me on that subject then. Yeah, I'm with you on the DeWitt thing. I love Adele DeWitt. She's one of my all-time favourite characters. She's just ruthless, and again, much like a lot of the characters in this show, you're not entirely sure all the time where they're coming from and whether they are good or whether, you know, they have the best interests of the people at heart. And Adele DeWitt was a lot like that. I tried to hope that even through all of her stuff that she was doing that was really bad, that she did have the best interest of at least the people in her care. And I suppose that's similar in a way to Amalia. Like, even if she's not the most perfect person, I feel like she definitely has the best interest of the people that are at the orphanage and of the Touched at heart, whether whatever's happened in her past or whatever else is going on behind the scenes. I do believe that, and I'm hoping that it's true, just like Adele DeWitt, that, you know, she's like with them through to the end.
Yeah, for me, for that, as far as Lavinia, I think if we took that scene in isolation, I would agree with you. If she... Obviously, in that time period, racism and misogyny are the norm, and a slight against an Irish Catholic commoner, I might be able to let that slide, but when you take that in combination with the badges that she placed on all of the touched, and then the scene at the very end, I can't see a reality in which she has the best interests of the touched in mind when she can kind of roll into a situation where they're being lobotomized and experimented on and put to hard work. That just feels like there's not much redemption there. But who knows? Anything can happen. We'll have to keep watching. And as far as Whedonverse connections, I just wanted to kind of put forward the unexpected death. Mary Brighton getting shot kind of reminds you of Tara getting shot.
I think that's one of the things in the shows. Whenever someone's like, oh, I'm going to watch this, or if I try to get them to watch one of the shows, I say, never try not to get too attached to anyone, because they'll always seem to leave you at weird moments. Some shows get too precious with their characters, and no matter what happens, they're never going to die. And I find that I lose interest. So I enjoy shows where, their lives literally hang in the balance every episode, and you're never sure when they're going to leave, because, like I say, shows where you think they're never going to kill off any of their characters get a bit boring. But definitely with Whedon shows, there are some of the most popular favourite characters, and they die, and you're like, oh, it just keeps you on your toes when you're watching the show.
I mean, even in life, we have a genetic predilection for adaptation and change. So in the stories that we write and that we watch or we listen to, we like, even subconsciously, we need to see some change. We need to see things beginning, things ending, people living, people dying, because it reflects our reality. And if I was to predict who's going to have the most, the Wesleyan angel transformation, I think it's going to be Augustus, who kind of starts off like Wesley did, a little nervous, a little biting off more than he can chew, kind of bumbly. And then I think by the end of it, he's going to be a badass, using crows to fight monsters and stuff, and doing crazy stuff. I think he's going to have an upward trajectory. That's my theory.
Yeah, I would hope so too. I think, like I said, you warm to him very quickly because he's this nice, innocent character. But yeah, he is quite meek at the minute, isn't he? I think it would be... And he's got a very useful power when we're talking about who to trust. He can literally become a bird and essentially go and spy on people, right? And kind of infiltrate places that nobody else can. So hopefully he will become more involved with the fight as such for the touched, and he'll get to delve deeper into things. Yeah, but if we didn't get to your letter this episode, we'll be sure to read it on the next one. Final thoughts, Shaun?
Yeah, so I overall, I really did enjoy the episode. As I said at the beginning, the episode isn't the most memorable for me, but that doesn't mean that I didn't actually enjoy the whole thing. And by far, the end scene and the scene with the water were definitely the two best scenes for me. Now I just want to see kind of where, what's going to happen further down the line, especially now we've seen this I say first cyborg, but, the second cyborg now working for the other team.
Yeah. I also liked this episode, and I agree with you, Shaun. It wasn't as memorable as the last two, but I will say that it had the same scenes that were very affecting. I did get a little whiplashed at the end, going from that thrilling fight scene to that beautiful Mary singing in the park scene to that heartbreaking assassination scene. It felt very up, down, but I enjoyed this episode. I don't want to quantify it, but if I had to, maybe a 7.5 or 8 out of 10. Solid episode.
Yeah, I agree. It was definitely an emotional roller coaster of an episode. Every scene had you really, really feeling for what was going on. The interrogation scene, and even just the low-key ones, you know, between like Mundy and Hugo and Augustus and Hugo. I feel like the show's really good at drawing you in and really, really caring about all of these characters and what's going on. Yeah, I mean, I quite enjoy being thrown from one place to another, like, throughout a show. Like I say, I think a lot of TV shows now I get a bit bored with quite easily. And I don't think this was too much, but I do think that, like you guys, it was the least memorable of the... Like, if you just try and pick moments out of your head, other than those big key scenes, you kind of think, what happened in this episode? But it's funny, because I enjoyed key scenes from it just as much as stuff like the previous episodes, but yeah, as a whole, not quite as strong. But I'm super excited for the next episode because there's so much going on still. But definitely for me, the most exciting thing is to find out what Myrtle was hearing that was clearly not the same as what everyone else was hearing. Yeah, so wrapping up, you can find us on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Amazon Music Podcasts, YouTube, and wherever else you stream your podcasts. For more Nevers-related content, you can visit us at hbothenevers.com, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at hbothenevers and at the Nevers Podcast, and also at the Nevers Podcast without an A at the end on Twitter. Any comments or questions could be sent to theneverspodcast@gmail.com, and please rate and review our podcast and help us move up the charts.
That's all for today's episode. Thanks for listening, and thank you, Laura and Shaun, for joining me today and sharing your thoughts on the third episode. Laura, where can people find you online?
So you can follow me on my Instagram, and that's LauraJP1721.
And Shaun?
You can find me at X Motion Studios on Instagram.
And I'm Chirag, and you can find me on pay-per-view. I'll be physically fighting Bruce Majors. And you can also find me on Twitter at Mayan Mailman. And until next week, this has been the Nevers Podcast.
This episode of the Nevers Podcast was written, produced, and edited by Matthew Yamanashi at Culture Inject Studios. The intro and outro music was produced by Guilherme Moraes. We are more than just a podcast. We're a fan community. You can keep up to date on the Nevers and chat with other fans by visiting hbothenevers.com. You can also follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube. Just search HBO The Nevers, all one word, and click that follow button. The Nevers Podcast is not endorsed by Mutant Enemy, Warner Media Entertainment, or any of its subsidiaries, including Home Box Office, HBO, and is intended for entertainment and educational purposes only. The Nevers and all names, pictures, and audio clips are registered trademarks and/or copyrights of their respective copyright holders.